Hello everybody and welcome back to another Space Engineers video. In today's video I thought we'd go back to the roots and take a look at some ship types. Today's ship type is the destroyer class of ships, probably one of the most incorrectly used. Obviously I say incorrectly very loosely. I really don't like people who have very strict boundaries and borders between ship types, because at the end of the day it is up to the creator. If you don't like it, that really isn't up to you. It's whatever they classify it as. In terms of their lore, different classes of ships, relatively speaking, may apply in different ways. For instance, frigate-sized ships may be way bigger in someone else's lore than they are in another person's lore. This isn't bad or good, it's just how it is. That's why I think having length boundaries and size, weight boundaries is quite stupid. But in general, you do have some pretty rough guidelines to follow for destroyers, to give you, what generally destroyers do. So, I'm not going to give you a size length, but here we have I've just picked out three pretty good destroyers, I think, pretty good examples of destroyers here. But they're all quite different, and I'm just going to go through each one, explain what I like about them and what I don't like about them in terms of being destroyers. So before that, I'll just quickly go over some basic rules, I would say, for destroyers. So generally speaking, you want to be between a cruiser or a frigate. I mean, you can touch these boundaries, but a destroyer really doesn't need to be that big, but it needs to be big enough to house enough weaponry to make it lethal. Usually they focus on quite traditional firepower as well. So by that I mean, like literally this draconis here, this by Reaver, this just has traditional guns all over it. So we have missile turrets, Gatling guns, interior turrets, literally just lining this thing, crammed with it. And that sort of links into the next thing, where typically they don't carry fighter craft. Yes, I think this is the Artemis, I can't remember. It doesn't have a name. It's called the Antenna class destroyer, hang on. God's sake. Please name your ships. Oh, right, okay, well, the orange destroyer here is, pretty sure it's the Artemis. Does have a hangar bay, but doesn't have any fighters, so that doesn't mean it holds fighters, that means it can accommodate shuttles and that. Or, it could hold fighters, who knows. But the Draconis, I know for a fact, doesn't hold any fighters. There's no problem with this, since it has enough standard weaponry to rip apart any ship by itself. Another point I'd like to make, which the Phantom over here sort of just ignores, is the fact that they typically aren't well armoured destroyers. They're sort of like glass cannons. They do need escorting, and they sort of form quite well into fleets as ship killers. But on their own, they shouldn't perform too well. They should be really good at their job, which is tearing ships apart, and that's about it. Speaking of that, since they are armed to the teeth, usually they should be capable of taking on ships bigger than them. So I'd say the Draconis over here should probably be capable of taking out a cruiser, which is, I'm pretty sure that will be capable of taking out a cruiser. Same with the Artemis, and definitely with the Phantom over here. Focused forward firepower is also another good point for destroyers. The Phantom achieves this more so by just sort of rocket pods, missile pods, etc. The Artemis also, the Draconis also achieves this. It's got 6 forward rocket pods. And over here we have a railgun, as well as these sort of missile batteries. These custom rotor missile batteries, which are mounted on the dorsal side of the, I think it's the Artemis. It's going to bug me. I'm just going to have to. Yeah, it is the Artemis. Okay, the Artemis destroyer. Right. In terms of good and bad examples of destroyers in sci-fi, I think by far the worst is the Star Destroyer. I've always thought of Star Destroyer as the name, rather than like its purpose, but it is called the Imperial class Star Destroyer, so it's kind of hard to argue with it. Obviously, it's more like a battle cruiser or a battleship, depending on who you ask. But yeah, that is one thing that can bug. Right, anyway, now that I've sort of glossed over some basic facts about destroyers, let's take a look at them more in depth. So first we have the Draconis. This is the B variant by Reaver. This ship is a pretty good example of a destroyer, although it does hurt me to say that. We have very good amounts of forward firepower. I completely missed these actually, these are tucked under. So we have 8 forward rocket pods. And also another good thing about these is they're mounted literally on the bow. So there's no chance of hitting yourself with the rockets, which can occur. It's light armour. It's got pretty good thrust in all directions, although that doesn't really matter with a destroyer. And it just has a lot of traditional weaponry. So if, for instance, a ship was here, you'd be looking at probably a dozen turrets ripping into you, and it's quite forward focused. What I mean by this is if we come back to the anus of the craft, we are probably going to be shot at by 1 or 2 turrets max. But that isn't a problem because it's not designed to battle ships in every single axis. There we go. It is supposed to point at them and go pew pew, and that is exactly what the Draconis achieves. Obviously it has some spaced armour. I believe that's probably mainly greeble, to be honest. And point defence is also there, but I mean it's not as important as with other screening vessels. So the Artemis, again, traditional forward firepower. We have these missile batteries across the craft. What is good about these missile batteries is that they are pretty good ship killers, large grid ship killers. This really does help with its, excuse me, this really does help with its classification, as these will tear apart quite large ships, much larger than itself, for sure. One design choice that I'm not really a fan of with this ship is the engine cluster. I did say that destroyers aren't supposed to be well armoured, but when literally a missile can take out a great deal of your thrust, that's probably not a good idea. Although it is stowed at the back, so if you are attacking from the front as you should be, they're going to be eating a whole lot of missiles and a whole lot of bullets as well. Lengthwise, the Artemis and the Draconis are pretty much equal, like they're pretty much the same. Draconis is slightly thicker and slightly longer, but overall they're roughly the same sort of space room size. Now we come over to the, I believe this is the Phantom. This is a TNF creation. Yes, it is. Trans-Neptunian Fleet. This is a bit of an interesting one, I think, because it's classed as a destroyer, but I think his terms for his lore may be a bit different. So we do have forward rocket pods. I believe in here is a railgun. Yep. And obviously the railgun. But the whole outer space frame is heavy armour, which is... it's a strange choice for a destroyer, considering you probably want to get in, destroy a couple ships, and get out. But I suppose if the default for his sort of fleet is heavy armour, this may be a better choice, as it will, you know, stand the test of battle a little bit better. I'd also say, probably for its size, it's... I'm going to say it's probably lacking in weaponry, to be honest. Certainly in the rear. I mean, again, this isn't a bad thing really, considering its classification. There is no weaponry back here. You'd be absolutely bobby flying up to this ship and grinding away some of its thrusters. However, if it's fighting like a destroyer should fight from the front, you will have a nasty amount of firepower pointing at you. And the fact that it's heavy armour does mean it can just take a bit more of a beating, and is more of a throwdown brawling class destroyer than the other two. These are more traditional destroyers. But these are all very good examples of destroyers and space engineers. I'd love to know what you think in the comments section down below. Please keep in mind this is just my opinion. I'm just basically vocalizing how I feel destroyers should be in Space Engineers. No guidelines, these aren't rules or anything, it's just general outlines for destroyers. So please go easy on me. I know these aren't directly connected with naval terms. I think naval destroyers are considered to be more like corvettes. I did have a read about that, and they sort of support by destroying smaller ships, preventing them from coming to larger ships. But this is sci-fi, not navy, so that's how they work over here. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody.